let's talk briefly about how we can use our graphing calculator to figure out to evaluate our trig function and their angles. Now, you want to make sure that you're memorizing the special angles, but there's plenty of times that in real world applications where we don't have a value off of that's a special triangle to know, to be able to recall from memory the function values are on it. So we're going to start by talking about function values, and then we'll end talking about angle measures. Now, function values are what we've been doing so far, where let's say that I wanted to know what the sine of 30 degrees was, and when we calculated it, we found out that that was some number 1/2. So that 1/2 is the function value that we're looking for when we're referring to this. So if I wanted to know what the sine of 49.2 degrees is, it's a pretty easy process to go to our calculator on. So if I come over here to my calculator, I first have to make sure, since I'm talking about degrees, that my angle is in degrees. I need to make sure my calculator is in degree mode. So I went to the mode portion. If you arrow down to the radian versus degree section here, you'll see that my degree is highlighted, so I'm in the correct mode. And that's probably the number one mistake students make, is they're not in the right mode. So if I want to go back to my home screen and figure out what the sine of 49.2 is, just enter in sine of 49.2. Click enter, and you'll see that the value is 0.7570 if I were to round. So come over here, using the calculator, 0.7570 I believe is what we found. Now, what about the secant of 97.977? So if I come over here, notice that on my calculator I don't have buttons for anything but sine, cosine, and tangent. Even the inverse sine, inverse cosine, and inverse tangent that you see raised above the big buttons is not secant, cosecant, and cotangent. So what are we going to do? We don't have a button for it on the calculator. Well, this is where we're going to use our reference angles, not our reference angles, our reciprocal angles that we've been talking about. So we know that secant and cosine are reciprocals of each other, right? We have an identity that says that, and it says that the secant of theta is going to be equal to 1 over the cosine of theta. So in other words, if I were to take the secant of some angle theta, that value is going to be exactly the same as if I were to take 1 divided by the cosine of that angle. So we use that concept in our calculator, and in order to figure out what the secant of theta, what the secant of our angle is, we're going to take 1 divided by the cosine of that angle, 97.977. So moving back over here, I'm going to take 1 divided by the cosine of 97.977. Hit enter, and it returns a value of negative 7.2059. So negative 7.2059. So when we are thinking about function values, we have our straightforward, just push the button and it gives us the answer, or we have to use our reciprocal identities to be able to come up with a more creative answer. So let's think then about angle measures. Now, angle measures said, okay, so what angle, when I take the sine of it, gives me back or returns the value of 1/2? So in this particular case, I want to know the angle that gives me the function value. So again, we can go to our calculator, and let's move that over a little bit more. So on the calculator, rather than finding the function value, which is the main buttons that you see, we are going to use the inverse function values. So the inverse function value is the one right above, in this particular case, sine. So I'm going to hit second sine, and you see that it looks like sine raised to the -1. Well, that's the inverse property that we're looking for. And I'm going to take the inverse sine of the function value 0.9677, 9677, hit enter, and I find out that if I were to take the sine of 75 degrees, I would get 0.9677. So the angle that I was interested in is 75 point, we'll just round to 40. So the inverse sine of 0.9677 is equal to 75.40. So we come into the same problem, or a similar problem, when we now have to do an angle measure on secant, cosecant, or cotangent. So we have to use that reciprocal property again. So I know, once again, that the cosine of theta is equal to 1 over the secant of theta. So I was just told in the problem that secant theta is 1.054, so it's 1 over that decimal value, 545. So in other words, the cosine of theta is equal to that fraction. So to find the angle that gives me back that fraction, we would then say the inverse cosine of that fraction, 1.0545, is going to return for me the angle that I'm interested in. So we have the inverse cosine of 1 divided by 1.0545, and we find out that that's equivalent to 18.5 degrees, or the angle of measure I'm interested in is 18.5 degrees. So when we are looking at not only function values but angle measures, we have to pay attention not only to the mode that our calculator is in, but if we are using any of the 3 functions that aren't listed on our calculator, we basically are using the reciprocal identities to help us with that.